I'm going to talk a bit about the process that we took in tackling this project this semester. So, as Jess mentioned, we're dealing a lot here with performance management and key performance indicators. That's really what is at the core of our assignment. And so in approaching this project, we really had to, first of all, gain a thorough understanding of what those terms mean. And those two terms in particular, performance management as a practice and key performance indicators as a tool set used in the practice of performance management. And so in learning about those terms, those foundational terms, we reviewed a number of documents. An example of one of the documents we reviewed was the Government Performance Results Act of 2010, which is basically it's a piece of federal legislation that was enacted for the purpose of requiring greater accountability and transparency in federal government agencies. And so that document served as kind of an example for us of how performance management and KPIs could be used in an organization to increase that accountability and transparency. Now, after we gained that foundational understanding of the terms and concepts we were going to be using, we really delved into the meat of our project, which is to do a lot of research on key performance indicators in the human resources function across a number of various different organizations, both public and private. In addition to the research into KPIs, we also conducted some interviews with division managers at the District of Columbia Department of Human Resources so that we could gain kind of a personal insight from people who are dealing with these KPIs and performance management every day in their jobs to get their perspective on how they use these KPIs and how they feel, they can be changed or improved in any way. Once we gathered all the information, all that data, we compiled it into a spreadsheet that we called our KPI matrix. And the idea of compiling all the data into the matrix was so that we could have a place where we could compare and contrast all that data and do some in-depth analysis to come up with recommendations for best practices, as Jess mentioned. Now, the goal of our project then, which we'll go into a bit more in a bit, is to, through this analysis that we've done of our research, to recommend 3 to 5 key performance indicators for each division of the human resources function as best practices and most appropriate KPIs for those divisions. But general enough KPIs such that they're scalable and can be applied across various different organizations and not just specific to a particular organization. To give you an example of what the matrix looks like, you can take a look at this. It looks a little weird because we blurred it out actually a little bit because we don't want you to focus on the words necessarily, the particular KPIs that are listed there. Instead, we want you to see what the format looks like. This is the sort of thing we were dealing with in our research. Of course, it was a lot bigger and a lot more information in there, but this is essentially what our matrix is. We have the organizations that we were researching across the top. Down the left-hand side, we had listed the divisions of the human resources function and then the KPIs within that we found within each of those divisions in different organizations, and then kind of where those the cells where those intersect, we would make a check mark where an organization used a particular KPI. Now, this was initially a good kind of indicator of what KPIs might be good and bad, because if we found that a particular KPI was used in a number of different organizations, it's probably a good indicator that it's a good, useful KPI. If, on the other hand, we find KPIs that are only used in one organization, then they might not be very good KPIs. But in addition to that, we did some much more in-depth analysis to really come up with the proper recommendations. And the primary distinction that we made in our in-depth analysis was between KPIs that are output-based and KPIs that are outcome-based. And the difference there is very important. And the difference is output-based KPIs are focused more on the process of, doing something, getting work done, without kind of keeping in mind that there's some kind of particular goal that that's working towards that is in the best interest of the organization. Whereas an outcome-based KPI has that goal in mind, is working towards that, so it's much more effective for the organization. So for example, an example of an output based KPI might be something like, with regard to filling a vacancy in an organization, that an output-based example might be to fill that position as quickly as possible. Yeah, so we want to fill a position, that's great, but it doesn't give us a timeline to get there and kind of guidelines for who that person should be. So an outcome-based example for that same situation might be to fill that position within, say, 105 days and to fill it with somebody who's appropriately qualified for that position, for that job description. So that's an example of the difference there. And we can talk more about that later if you like. Now to talk a little bit more towards our end goal, you can see here we've given you an example of an organization setup. Basically, any organization is going to have these 6 core functions at the top here, one of which is the human resources function. And within the human resources function, we found that there are usually about 6 divisions that are distinguished from one another as we've laid them out here at the bottom. And so these 6 divisions are what we're looking to, or what we have recommended best KPIs for. So what we're going to show you is 3 to 5 KPIs that we recommended for each of these divisions as best and most appropriate KPIs for each division, while being general enough that they can be scalable and applicable to any organization. So that being said, Cole now is going to take us on a bit of a deeper dive into each of these